The 9:30 a.m. crowd at peak performance was the usual mix until the young influencer pointed his camera at me. "Look at this grandma," he laughed for his followers. "She's gonna break a hip." He had no idea I used to warm up with his personal record. The automatic doors at peak performance hissed open, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the air conditioning, but the smell. It's a scent unique to gyms, a sharp tang of industrial cleaning solution layered over the metallic smell of the weights and the faint, earthy background of old sweat and chalk. I pulled my keys from the pocket of my faded sweatshirt and beeped my little plastic tag. The girl at the desk, Jenny, gave me a small wave. I waved back. It was 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. The 9:30 crowd was my crowd. We were a predictable mix. A few college students who definitely didn't have a 10 a.m. lecture. Their earbuds jammed in so tight I worried for their hearing. A handful of parents, moving with efficient, hurried energy to get their hour in before school pickup. And then there was me. I'm 73. My gray hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it barely moved, and my sweatshirt was from a college meet in 1976. The logo was so cracked you couldn't read the university name anymore. I shuffled over to the lockers, my left knee complaining with a dull, familiar ache. I had already been up for hours. My morning always started the same way. 5 a.m., the kettle whistling. A cup of strong black tea and 2 slices of toast with marmalade, eaten while standing at my kitchen sink, looking out at the little bird feeder in my yard. I'd spent an hour stretching on my living room floor, just coaxing my muscles to cooperate. The silence of my small house was a comfort, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the thwack of the newspaper landing on the porch. Peak performance was the opposite of my house. It was loud, bright, and smelled nothing like marmalade. I hung my coat in a locker and made my way to the stretching area, my old cross trainers squeaking slightly on the rubber floor. In the center of the gym, in the sacred space of the deadlift platforms, he was holding court. I didn't know his name, but I called him Mr. Tripod. He was maybe 22, with a chest and arms that looked like they'd been inflated, straining against a neon yellow tank top that was mostly just strings. His tripod was set up, a blinding ring light mounted on top, and his phone was already recording. He was talking to his phone, loud enough for the entire free weight section to hear. "What's up, Jacks It Up crew? It's PR day, baby. We are feeling dangerous today. We're gonna send this 385 to the moon." I sighed very quietly and picked up a foam roller. I settled onto the mat, trying to ignore the performance. I'd seen his type come and go. Back in my day, we trained in dusty, windowless basements that smelled like rust and ammonia. We didn't have crews. We had teammates and a coach who yelled at us if our form was sloppy. We trained to lift, not to talk about lifting, but, I reminded myself, the world changes. I was just an old woman trying to keep her joints from seizing up. I finished rolling out my back and moved to the dumbbell rack. I picked up the 5-pounders, the pink ones with the rubber coating. They felt weightless, familiar. I found my usual spot, a quiet corner by the window, and started my shoulder rotations. 1, 2, 3. I focused on the feeling, the slight, clean pull in my deltoid, the smooth rotation in the socket. This wasn't about building muscle anymore. This was about maintenance. It was about being able to lift my own groceries, to twist the lid off a jar of pickles, to stay independent in the house my husband and I had bought 50 years ago. It was about keeping the rust off the hinges. Across the room, Mr. Tripod chalked his hands, clapping them together in a cloud of white powder that drifted over the nearby treadmills. He bellowed at his phone. "All right, crew, watch this. Light work!" The gym music seemed to fade as he gripped the bar. I stopped my rotation, the little pink weight held steady in my hand, and I watched. Mr. Tripod stood over the 385-pound bar. He inhaled a huge, noisy suck of air and yelled, "Let's go!" He bent down and grabbed the bar. He yanked it. You don't yank 385 pounds, you pull. You squeeze the floor apart with your feet. You brace your core like you're about to be punched, and you drive with your legs. You become a machine, a lever. This kid, he was just using his back. His hips shot up first, way too fast. His legs were almost straight, but the bar was still on the floor. He was trying to lift the entire weight with just his lower spine. I almost winced. I could practically hear his vertebrae grinding together. My old coach, Victor, would have thrown a clipboard. "You are a lifter, not a fishing rod." He used to roar, his voice thick with a Polish accent. "Stop fishing!" This kid was fishing. His face turned a deep, blotchy purple. A vein I didn't know a human could have pulsed in his forehead. The bar shuddered, rising an inch, then another. He hitched it, resting it on his thighs. A clear disqualification in any meet I'd ever been in. He rebent his knees, hiked the bar up his legs, and finally, with a strangled shriek that sounded more like a dying rabbit, he locked his knees and hips. He stood there, shaking, vibrating with the strain. Then, he dropped it. He didn't lower it. He just opened his hands at the top. Boom! The 385 pounds of iron and rubber slammed onto the platform. The sound was like a car crash. It echoed through the entire building. I saw a woman on the elliptical machine grab her chest. The guy on the bench press next to him dropped his own weight, startled. "New PR, baby. 385. Light work!" Mr. Tripod screamed, his voice cracking. He flexed for his phone, his arms shaking, sweat pouring down his face. "Light work!" He was panting, completely out of breath. He staggered over to his phone, still filming, wiping his face on the hem of his stringer. He was basking in the attention his noise had created. He took a big, dramatic swig from a gallon jug of bright blue water. He was scanning the room, looking for his next piece of content. His eyes and his camera panned past the treadmills, past the cable machines, and then they landed on me. I was still in my corner, still doing my slow, methodical shoulder rotations. 5 pounds, pink. A smirk crossed his face. It was a practiced, nasty expression. He zoomed in on me. I didn't need to see his phone screen to know. I could feel the focus of the lens. "And look," he said, his voice loud and carrying. He was performing for his audience now. We even got a little inspiration over here. "Look at this grandma. Points for trying, right?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the rotation. "In and out. Seriously, ma'am, be careful," he called out, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Don't want to break a hip. So dangerous." A few of the college kids nearby snickered. The parents looked away, embarrassed. I felt a heat rise in my chest and flush my neck. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was something older. It was the same feeling I used to get when a judge gave me a bad call or when a competitor tried to psych me out. It was annoyance. Dangerous? Breaking a hip? This child, who had just used his spine like a crowbar, was telling me to be careful. I thought about 385 pounds. I remembered what that weight used to feel like. It was a warm-up. It was the weight I'd use for sets of 5, just to get the blood flowing. I remembered the heavy, satisfying clank of the 100-kilo plates sliding onto the bar in the Olympic training hall. I finished my set. 10 reps. I lowered the small pink dumbbells. I placed them gently, soundlessly, back on the rack in their proper slot. I brushed the chalk dust, my own from the little bag in my pocket, off my hands. I had come here to stretch my knee. That was all. I had planned to do my rotations, walk on the treadmill for 20 minutes, and go home to water my azaleas. But as I stood there, the boom of his dropped weight still ringing in my ears, my plans changed. I turned and started walking toward the deadlift platform. I walked across the rubber floor, my old cross trainers making no sound. Jackson was still fiddling with his phone, which was propped up on its tripod. He was checking the angle, fluffing his neon blonde hair. He didn't see me until I was standing right beside him. He glanced up, startled, then his face settled into that same practiced, smug look from before. He probably thought I was a fan coming over to tell him how strong he was, or maybe to scold him for his language. Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake politeness, clearly annoyed that I was interrupting his filming. I ignored him. I looked at the bar he had dropped so dramatically. 385 pounds. It was loaded with 4 45-pound plates, a 25, a 10, and a 5 on each side. A messy, complicated load. Victor hated that. Make the bar clean, he'd always say. It shows respect. I walked right past Jackson, past the end of his bar, and went to the weight tree. The smell of the iron and rubber was stronger here, comforting. I found the 25-pound plates. I didn't bother taking the 10 and the 5 off his bar. I'd just add on. I picked up a 25-pound plate in my left hand. My fingers slid easily into the grip holes. I picked up another in my right. The weight felt good, solid. Not heavy, just present. I walked back to the bar. Jackson was watching me now, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Hey, what are you doing with those?" I didn't answer. I knelt just slightly, no bending at the back, and slid the first 25-pound plate onto the left side of the barbell. The sound it made was sharp, distinct. Sheeing, clank. The metal of the plate hit the other plates. Jackson's jaw dropped. "What?" he started to say. I walked around the end of the bar, my steps even, and slid the second 25-pound plate onto the right side. Sheeing, clank. The bar was now loaded to 435 pounds, 50 pounds more than his light work personal record. The arrogance in Jackson's face completely shattered. It was replaced by something else, pure panic. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about getting sued. "Grandma, don't!" he yelled, his voice suddenly high and squeaky. He lunged forward, grabbing his tripod as if to protect it. "Stop! You can't! You're gonna snap in half! I'm not spotting you! I'm not liable for this!" His shouting cut through the gym's background music. The whir of the treadmills behind me suddenly seemed very loud, because every other sound had stopped. The guy who had been bench pressing was sitting up, staring. The college kids had pulled their earbuds out. Jenny at the front desk was standing on her tiptoes, peering over the counter. Jackson's phone was still recording, capturing his frantic face and me, standing calmly beside a 435-pound barbell. I just looked at the bar. It looked balanced now, clean. I looked down at my own hands. They are 73-year-old hands. The skin is thin, spotted with age. The knuckles are swollen with a bit of arthritis. But they were the same hands that had gripped a bar in Warsaw, in Moscow, in Munich. I rubbed them together, feeling the fine, dry dust of the chalk I always kept in my pocket. I stepped forward. I stood in front of the bar, 435 pounds. The gym was so quiet, I could hear the faint whir of the ventilation system overhead. Jackson was still sputtering. "I'm serious, lady, stop! You're gonna... I didn't listen. I was listening to Victor's voice in my head, from a dusty gymnasium 50 years ago. "The bar is your partner. Do not fight it. Persuade it." I stepped up, planting my feet. My old trainers gripped the rubber mat. My shins were just an inch from the cold steel of the bar. I looked down. The knurling, the rough, etched pattern for grip, was caked with Jackson's chalk. I bent my knees, kept my back straight, and reached down. My hands found their exact position, just outside my shins. Left hand over, right hand under. My old mixed grip. It felt like coming home. My swollen knuckles complained just a little, but my fingers locked around the bar. "I'm not kidding. I'm filming this. You're gonna get hurt," Jackson yelped. I pulled my shoulders back and down, setting my lats. I pulled the slack out of the bar, feeling the plates shift and settle. There was a tiny tink as the steel pulled taut. I took a deep breath, held it, and braced my core. I didn't look at Jackson. I didn't look at the crowd. I stared at a small crack in the wall plaster 10 feet in front of me. Then I pushed. I didn't yank. I didn't jerk. I pushed the floor of the gym away from me with my legs. The weight didn't fight me. It peeled off the floor, silent. My back angle was locked, solid as a piece of oak. My hips and shoulders rose together. There was no rounding, no shaking, no hitching. The bar slid up my legs, and with a smooth, powerful extension, I locked my hips and knees. Click. I stood there. 435 pounds, perfectly still in my hands. My breathing was steady. I held it for a beat. 1, 2. Then I began the descent. I pushed my hips back, letting the bar travel down the same path it had come up. I controlled it. I didn't let it crash. The plates touched the platform with a quiet, respectful thud. Before the sound had even faded, I took another quick breath. My grip was still set. I pulled again. Shh! It was just as smooth. Just as easy. Lock out. I held it for another second, just to be sure. Then I lowered it again, with the same control. Thud. I let go of the bar. It settled, unmoving. I straightened up, my hands open at my sides. My heart rate was barely elevated. I turned my head. The gym was frozen. The guy on the bench press was just sitting there, his eyes wide. The woman on the elliptical had stopped pedaling, one foot in the air. Jenny at the front desk had her hand clamped over her mouth, and Jackson. His face was a mask of pale, slack-jawed shock. The neon yellow of his shirt made his skin look green. He looked from me to the bar, and then to his phone, which was still recording, capturing his utter silent humiliation. The silence in the room was absolute. It was louder than his dropped weight had ever been. I stood there for a moment, letting the residual tension from the lift drain from my arms. My hands were tingling from the grip. Jackson hadn't moved. His mouth was literally open. He looked like he was trying to form a word, but his brain had stopped sending the signals. He made a small, choking sound. I looked him straight in the eye. My voice came out quiet, but it cut through the silence. "Your form is terrible," I said. I didn't yell it. I didn't say it with anger. I said it like I was telling him his shoelace was untied. It was a simple statement of fact. His face crumpled. The shock turned into a deep red flush that crawled up his neck and over his ears. He finally managed to close his mouth, but he didn't say anything. I didn't wait for an answer. I had nothing else to say. I turned around, my back to him and his 435-pound bar, and started walking. My path took me right past the bench press where the man had been staring. As I passed, he stood up. He was older than Jackson, maybe in his 40s, with a respectful, stunned look on his face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low. That was incredible." "What was that?" I gave him a small, polite nod. "Just keeping the joints loose," I said. A few of the college kids were whispering. One of them, a young man who looked like he actually knew his way around the weight room, just dipped his head to me as I walked by. It was a small, quick gesture of respect. Jenny at the front desk was still on her tiptoes, her eyes wide. I didn't want the attention. The lift wasn't a performance. It was a correction. I felt the familiar old iron satisfaction in my muscles, the clean feeling of a good, heavy pull. But I also just wanted to finish my workout. I'd done what I needed to do. I made my way over to the cardio section, leaving the free weight area and its silence behind. As I stepped onto a treadmill, I glanced at the wall of mirrors opposite. In the reflection, I could see the whole scene. Jackson was still standing motionless by the platform. He looked small now, dwarfed by the weight he couldn't lift properly. He finally, slowly, reached out and tapped his phone, stopping the recording. He didn't flex. He didn't yell. He just stared at the bar, his face pale. I turned forward and pressed the quick start button on the treadmill. The belt began to move with a soft whir. I set the speed to 2.5 miles per hour. A nice, easy walk. I put my hands on the rails. My left knee ached. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The adrenaline from the lift began to fade, leaving just the quiet hum of the machine and the familiar, dull ache. It was enough. I still had to get home and water my azaleas. I walked on the treadmill for exactly 20 minutes. The timer beeped, and I pressed the red stop button. The belt slowed to a halt. When I looked up, the gym had mostly returned to its normal rhythm. The clank of weights, the whir of the machines, the terrible pop music over the speakers. Jackson was gone. His platform was empty. He had re-racked all the weights, even the 25-pound plates I had added. He'd taken his tripod, his gallon jug of blue water, and his ego, and he had vanished. A few people still glanced at me as I stepped off the treadmill and did a final stretch for my hamstrings. They didn't stare openly anymore. It was more discreet, little side-eyed looks, followed by quiet whispers to their workout partners. I was no longer just the old woman with the pink dumbbells. I was something else, a mystery I didn't care. I was finished. My knee felt a little better, and that's what I had come for. I walked to the locker room. It smelled like steam and cheap soap. I grabbed my coat, ran a comb through my damp hair, and splashed some cold water on my face. The face in the mirror was just my face, 73, tired, and ready for lunch. I walked back out. Jenny was busy checking in a new member, but she saw me out of the corner of her eye. She stopped her sales pitch for a second, looked right at me, and gave me a small, shy smile. It was a real one this time. I nodded once and pushed through the doors. The hiss of the automatic doors closed behind me, cutting off the music. The air in the parking lot was cool and smelled like car exhaust and the damp earth from the landscaping. My car, a 15-year-old tan sedan, was parked in its usual spot under the big oak tree. It started with a reliable grumbling cough. I clicked on my turn signal, a steady, rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock, and pulled out onto the main road. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. My house is small, brick, with dark green shutters that need a new coat of paint. It was quiet. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click. I stepped inside and shut the door. The silence of my house settled around me. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a full one. It was the sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway, tick-tock. The smell of old books from the shelves, a hint of the lemon polish I used on the weekend, and the faint, sweet scent of the last rose from my garden, sitting in a little bud vase on the kitchen table. On the mantelpiece, there was a black and white photo. It was me 50 years ago in a stiff lifting singlet, with USA stitched on the chest. I was grimacing, hoisting a barbell over my head. Next to me was my late husband, David, his arm around my shoulder, grinning. David wasn't a lifter. He was an accountant. He just liked that I was strong. I didn't look at the photo. I already knew what it looked like. I went to my bedroom and changed out of my faded sweatshirt and gym pants. I put on a pair of soft corduroys and a warm blue cardigan, my house clothes. In the kitchen, I took my old metal watering can from under the sink. It was green with a little rust around the spout. I filled it with lukewarm water, the hiss of the tap seeming loud in the quiet room. I slid open the back door and stepped out onto the small stone patio. My azaleas were in full bloom. Big, showy bursts of deep pink and white. They were David's favorite. I've been taking care of them for 30 years. I moved slowly from bush to bush, lifting the heavy can. I tipped the spout, letting the water soak into the dark soil at the base of each plant. This was why I went to the gym. It wasn't for 435 pounds. It was for this. It was so I could lift the watering can without my back seizing. It was so I could bend down to pull the weeds that were creeping in near the fence. I thought about the boy at the gym. His purple face, his rounded back. That noise when he dropped the bar. I didn't feel angry at him anymore. I mostly just felt tired. I finished watering the last bush and set the empty can down. My knuckles ached from the lift. My knee ached from the treadmill. But it was a good ache. It was the ache of having used my body. Victor would have been so annoyed. Not at the boy, but at me. "Why you show off, Agnes?" I could hear his gravelly voice. "You are not a circus bear. You are a lifter. Do your work. Go home." A small smile touched my lips. He was right. But then again, Victor never had to listen to someone called Jacks It Up Fitness. I went back inside and closed the sliding door, the snick of the lock echoing in the quiet kitchen. The house felt warm after the cool air outside. It was time for lunch. My routine is simple. On Tuesdays, I finish the leftover soup from Monday. I took the container of lentil soup from the refrigerator, poured it into a small pot, and set it on the stove. I turned the knob and the burner clicked, then ignited with a soft whoosh. I got a spoon from the drawer and a bowl from the cabinet. I could hear the soup beginning to warm up, a gentle bubbling sound. The smell was good. Thyme and carrots and the earthy smell of the lentils. I was reaching for a piece of bread when the doorbell rang. Ding dong. I stopped, my hand in midair. The sound was jarring. I almost never get visitors on a Tuesday afternoon. The mailman just drops the mail in the slot. Ding dong. I turned the stove down to low and wiped my hands on a dish towel. I walked through the quiet living room, past the grandfather clock tick-tock, and went to the front door. I looked through the peephole. It was the man from the gym, the one from the bench press, not the Jackson boy, but the one who had spoken to me with respect. He was standing on my porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking awkward. He was holding a small white paper bag from the corner bakery. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. He looked startled, as if he hadn't expected me to answer. He was wearing a jacket over his work clothes now. "Ma'am?" he said. He looked at the numbers on my house, then back at me, as if to confirm he was in the right place. I hope this isn't a bother. I recognized your car. From the gym parking lot. I'm Mark." He held out the paper bag. I wanted to say, I've been lifting for 20 years, and I have never ever seen anything like that. It was perfect. I looked at him. He seemed sincere. He wasn't here to mock or to film. He just looked confused and impressed. "Thank you," I said. "It's cold out. Would you like a cup of tea?" He blinked. "Oh, I don't want to intrude. I have soup on the stove." "It's no trouble." I opened the door wider. He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." He stepped inside, wiping his feet carefully on the mat. I closed the door, and the silence of the house settled back in, now shared. "The kitchen is this way," I said. He followed me. He looked around at the old furniture, the photos on the wall, the clock. He seemed to be trying to understand how this quiet house and the woman who had just deadlifted 435 pounds could be the same place. I went to the stove and gave the soup a stir. "I only have black tea. Is that all right?" "That's perfect. Thank you," he said. He sat down at the small wooden kitchen table, placing the paper bag gently in the center. I filled the kettle and set it on the other burner. While the water heated, I got down another cup and saucer. "I just have to ask," he said, his voice low. "Who are you, ma'am? Were you a professional?" I poured my soup into my bowl and sat down opposite him. The kettle began to hiss. "I used to lift," I said. "A very long time ago. I was on a few teams." A few teams, he repeated, smiling a little. I'll bet you were. That wasn't a gym lift, that was technique. I've only seen that in videos, from the Olympics. The kettle whistled. I got up, poured the boiling water into the 2 cups, and set one in front of him. It's just muscle memory now. It's a lot of muscle, he said. He looked down at his own hands, then at me. That kid, Jackson. He's all over the gym's Instagram page. He posted an apology, said he was humbled. Someone filmed your lift from the treadmills. I think he's getting more attention for your video than his own. I dunked my tea bag up and down. I don't know anything about that. I just don't like to see someone hurt themselves. His form was going to snap his back. Mark nodded, stirring his tea. I lift to keep up with my kids, to carry the groceries. He lifts for his phone. I lift, I said, looking out my window at the garden, so I can water my azaleas. Mark looked out the window with me. He didn't say anything for a minute. He just sipped his tea. I think, he said finally, I understand. He finished his cup, thanked me again, and stood up to leave. The bag, I said, pointing. Oh, right. They're scones, he said. From the bakery. They're very good. I walked him to the door. Thank you for stopping by, Mark. And for the scone. Thank you for the tea, Agnes, he said, reading the name off a small, framed cross-stitch by the door. And for the lesson. I closed the door behind him and slid the deadbolt. Click. I went back to the kitchen. The house was mine again. Tick-tock. My soup had cooled just enough to eat. I sat down and opened the white paper bag. Inside was a large golden-brown currant scone. I took a bite. It was very good. Strength is a funny thing. For that boy, it was a performance, something to be shouted. For me, it was a tool. It was the quiet ability to open a stuck jar, to carry my own luggage, to live in my own house. It was the difference between breaking and bending. I finished my soup and my scone and looked out at my bright pink azaleas. They needed to be watered again tomorrow, and I would be ready,